Hi, my name's Amelia, and recently I had to make the most difficult decision of my life. Even now, just thinking about it, I feel like I could burst into tears. Up until last year, my life was so carefree and chilled, and then out of nowhere, both of my twin sisters got sick at exactly the same time. I was the only one who could save them. I mean, that's a pretty terrifying thing. But there's more. You see, I could only save one of them, and so that's where my story begins. My family has always been that stereotypical perfect family. My parents are still crazy in love with each other, and me and my sisters are like best friends. I have two sisters, Beth and Carly, and they are identical twins. They're only 3 years younger than me, and you'd think I'd feel a bit left out sometimes because they have that whole twin thing going on. But they treat me like I'm one of them, which is great. Last year, we vowed to spend a lot of time together because I was going to be heading to college on the other side of the country. My dad planned this epic road trip, and a week before we were due to go, Beth started feeling really unwell. She woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, and her fever was sky high. By the time morning came, Carly started complaining that her stomach hurt, and pretty soon, she had a fever too. It was a Sunday, so we drove to the hospital to try and get an emergency appointment. As soon as the nurse at reception saw them, she rushed them into a private room in the hospital. The skin on their face was starting to turn a slight shade of yellow, and that's when we realized something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just flu. A few hours later, after a lot of blood tests and painfully waiting for the results, the head doctor informed us that Beth and Carly were suffering from a rare form of liver disease and that it had probably been developing ever since their birth. Mom burst into tears and started blaming herself. When she'd fallen pregnant with the twins, she hadn't known, and she'd worked on a wine estate, so she'd been constantly tasting and reviewing new wines. When she found out she was pregnant, she was paranoid that all the wine would affect their health. Dad was comforting her, telling her of course it wasn't her fault. I could see how upset Dad was too, but he was trying to hold it together for Beth and Carly. They were devastated, of course, although I don't think they truly understood what it all meant. The doctors left us so we could have some private family time. We managed to calm Mum down, and Dad even cracked a joke and got us all laughing. We were still giggling when the head doctor walked back in with a grim expression on his face. My heart sunk. He looked like he was about to tell us that somebody had died. He pulled up a seat and asked us all to sit down. I could see Mom getting teary again, and so I grabbed her hand and held it tightly. The doctor told us that there was some more news, and he didn't know how to tell us. I looked at Beth and Carly. I would have done anything to make them better. Little did I know, that was about to become an actual reality for me a moment later. Turns out, Beth and Carly's disease was a lot more critical than we thought, and that their only chance of survival would be if they could find two donors who would be willing to donate part of their liver. I couldn't believe it. My baby sisters needed transplants. I immediately jumped up and said, I'll do it. I'll do it right now. Take my liver, please. Just save my sisters. I couldn't stop crying. I felt like our whole world was crumbling. And yet, Beth and Carly were so strong through all of this. They just lay there, comforting each other, whilst Mum and I were a mess. Dad got to work straight away. He started contacting all our family cousins, aunts, uncles, even second cousins. Everyone was heartbroken to hear the news, and they all rushed to do blood tests to find out if they would be a match for the twins. Once we'd stopped crying, Mum and I went off to do the tests. I didn't even want to leave my sisters alone in that room. What if they died before we even got the results? So many thoughts were running through my head. I'm terrified of needles. It's like my biggest phobia, but I didn't even feel this one. My mind was so far away, I might as well have been on another planet. The results came out quick. Unfortunately, Mom's liver wasn't stable enough to make her a suitable donor, and nor was Dad's. The doctors informed us that this was normal due to their age, etc. I was crossing all of my fingers and toes as a nurse walked in to hand the doctor my results. You're a match, he said. I had to have him repeat this because I couldn't believe what he was saying. The relief was so overwhelming that I actually ran up to him and started hugging him. I could save my sisters and everything would go back to normal. The transplant surgery would only take a day, but the recovery process was at least a month. Dad had obviously canceled our vacation, but then I realized something else. I couldn't go to college. I'd missed the first 2 weeks, and what if the surgery went wrong? No, I needed to be here and help my sisters recover. I tried to put all negative thoughts out of my head and focus on the positive. Later that day, I called the admissions department of my college and informed them I'd have to defer until the following year. They completely understood and sent their good wishes for my sisters. Even though I knew it was the right decision, it still killed me that I wouldn't be going to college at the same time as all my friends. I'm the most indecisive person in the world, so I'm surprised I made that decision so quickly. The doctors scheduled the surgery for the following month. They couldn't afford to wait any longer because Beth was especially struggling, but they wanted to make sure everything was in place. They needed to keep an eye on me to make sure my health was okay for the transplant to be successful. The slightest problem with my liver, and they wouldn't be able to do it. Every day I had to go for blood tests to check my liver. Beth and Carly were stable, and even though they have to stay in the hospital, we still had a fun time together, watching movies, and loads of their friends visited. About a week before the scheduled surgery date, the doctor called me. I was over at my friend Amy's house at the time. As soon as I heard what he said, I rushed to the hospital. My parents were already waiting there. This next bit of news was like a punch to the chest. After a lot of research, the doctors had discovered that if I wanted to live a long and healthy life, I could only donate a very small part of my liver, which meant that I could only donate enough to save one of my sisters. I felt like I was going to pass out. No one else had been a correct match so far, which meant that I was the only one who could save my sisters. And now, here I was, being told that actually I could only save one of them. I didn't want to deal with this. I was only 17 years old. Why was I having to make such a life altering decision? I wasn't even an adult yet. Mom and Dad held me and told me everything would be okay and that they were sure they would find another donor. But I had to make my decision quickly. I walked to my sister's room, and when I walked in, I could tell they already knew. It was obvious they'd been crying. Fear pulsed through me. There was no way I could make this decision. They weren't just my sisters, they were my best friends. Beth, who was slightly more sick than Carly, told me to pick Carly. And Carly told me I had to choose Beth because Beth needed the help more. I couldn't take it. I ran out of the hospital. They could figure it out, and I'd do what I needed to do. Either way, it felt like my life was over. I was supposed to be at college with all my friends, and instead I was left with the responsibility of choosing which of my sisters I would save. The next week passed by in a blur, and before I knew it, the day of surgery had arrived. Beth and Carly had chosen which of them I'd be saving, and they weren't going to tell me until after the surgery. I was put under an anesthetic, and afterwards the surgeons were smiling. It had gone successfully. But who had I saved? Which sister? And what about the other one? I would need to stay in hospital for at least a week to recover, but I needed some fresh air, so I started walking towards the main entrance. I felt slightly dizzy from the anesthetic, so at first I didn't even notice my dad standing by the reception. There was some kind of commotion happening, and my dad was speaking to a woman who looked very similar to him, but just much, much younger. In fact, she looked closer to my age than his. Who was she? Well, that's when things really hit the fan, because I was not prepared for what happened next. My dad had got his high school sweetheart pregnant, and this woman standing in the hospital was his daughter. I couldn't believe it. As my dad explained this all to me, I honestly thought I'd snap. First of all, how had my dad kept this a secret for all these years? Second of all, what on earth was she doing here at a time like this? I so badly wanted to hate her, but she saved us big time. My dad had reached out to her when we needed donors for Beth and Carly. Now she was here because her blood tests had shown she was also a perfect match. She could save the other twin. When I heard this, I wanted to hug her. I didn't even have time to be angry at my dad because all I could think about was how both of my sisters would survive. And now we had a fourth sister, too. This was crazy. So, in the end, it all worked out. Sally, our new stepsister, saved Carly's life, and I saved Beth's. I want to say that we all lived happily ever after, but of course, my dad had a lot to answer for. All that mattered in that moment, though, was celebrating Beth and Carly's successful transplants. We could deal with the rest later. And oh boy, did we have a lot to talk about. What do you think of my story? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.